Chapter 21 Minuet of the Forest. Night of the previous day. It had been a horrible day. Cold and miserable, Saria curled herself tightly in a ball within her cot, listening to the soft breathing of the other kokiri in the crowded tent. She could still hear the muffled sounds of Gerudo outside as they spoke in their native tongue. The Gerudo were camped on the southern edge of the Lost Woods that was bordered by the Faron River. So close to home, Saria thought, a familiar ache gnawing at her chest. She hadn't been this close to the great Deku tree's grove in 7 years. She closed her eyes and let her mind wander amidst the forest beyond the camp. Touching the consciousness of another living creature in the woods, or even a spirit, should have been easy. Beyond the confusing tangle of thoughts that belonged to the occupants of the Gerudo camp, Saria felt nothing. She should have felt something. She concentrated harder, searching for some sign of life, but there was just an endless silence. It was as if the woods were now completely devoid of life. Nothing stirred, and the great tall sentinels stood leafless, clutched within the depths of winter. Saria opened her eyes, gathering her thoughts. Something was terribly wrong. Either that or the Gerudo had put something in her food to stop her using her telepathy. No, she thought, that couldn't be right. They had no way of knowing she could do that, not unless she accidentally used her skill on them. Cold, Saria huddled in her blankets and tried to get warm. Her body still ached from the beating she'd received several days earlier, the winter chill making the painful welts seem worse. Shinju, the Gerudo placed in charge of the Kokiri slaves, had believed Saria was responsible for Foren's recent escape. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to escape. On his last attempt, he'd received 10 lashes. Thinking about it still made Saria feel ill. Where are you, Foren's? Saria thought. It was part of the reason she'd been trying to let her mind reach out to the creatures in the woods. She desperately wanted to know if he was alive. She hadn't wanted him to try and escape, knowing that it was a foolish thing to do. She'd warned him. Do not dwell upon what you cannot change, child. Focus on what you can do. The great Deku tree's words seemed to echo in her mind from long ago. She felt the weight of that loss more now than she had in years. That memory of his death made her think of that night 7 years ago, when she and the other Kokiri had been torn from their homes. The smell of wood smoke that had roused them from their sleep had been their only warning. The woods surrounding the village had been set alight, with only a narrow corridor of the forest left untouched. As Saria, Mido, Foren's, and the other elders evacuated the village, they had realized too late what was happening. Flushed out of their homes, the Kokiri hadn't made it far before a horde of Bulblins had descended on them. The Gerudo had been there too, and Saria was certain that if they hadn't ordered the Blinn to capture and not kill, the outcome would have been far worse. Saria didn't remember what happened after she heard the first screams. Something had struck her over the head. Next thing she knew, Mido was leaning anxiously over her, his back against the bars of a cramped cage. The Kokiri had been taken to a stone monolith in a land devoid of trees, a realm where rock and sand, glimmering golden in the evening sun, stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a harsh land, the inhabitants harsher, and Saria couldn't help but wonder how on earth Gerudo could live in such an inhospitable place. After that, the inside of the red stone walls of what the Gerudo referred to as the Fortress of Sands became the Kokiri's home. From time to time, Saria and the other Kokiri were sent with a detachment of the Gerudo army to tend to their horses, fires, and other needs the forest children could meet. The first year had been the worst. Almost every day a Kokiri would collapse from the heat or be brought to her with their feet blistered and burnt. She was supposed to be a healer, But her remedies were useless, and Saria could only watch helplessly as her friends suffered. She prayed to the forest spirits and the mother goddess for Roar. The only answers she received were vague and unsettling dreams. Sometimes she thought of Link. She had waited for him, as she'd promised she would. When the birds bore her tidings of a tragedy in the north, she had known Link was dead. She still remembered the day she had first seen him, wrapped tightly in a white swaddle beneath the canopy of the great Deku tree. She would never forget that day. "You're still awake." Saria nearly jumped out of her skin in fright. She clung to her blankets, squinting at a sudden intrusion of light, and saw a young Gerudo staring at her, holding a lantern. "Sorry," the girl whispered. "I didn't mean to scare you. I came to see if you were okay." Saria could see the concern in the girl's eyes as the lantern light illuminated them. "I'm fine," Saria whispered back. Physically she was fine, despite the bruising Shinju had given her. It could have been a lot worse. The Gerudo weren't completely cruel. The Bulblins and the larger Moblins were another matter. Pig-like both in appearance and behavior, they were brutish and had no qualms about hurting the forest children. Their masters, two ugly hags, permitted it. Even the Gerudo hated the witches, and their presence was barely tolerated. Not all the Gerudo were bad. Some pitied the forest children and seemed uncomfortable having the Kokiri as slaves. Letitia was one such Gerudo. She taught Saria and the others the Gerudo language. Sometimes she smuggled food into the Kokiri's tents, including a range of Gerudo sweets. The only thing Letitia had not been able to retrieve were the Kokiri's fairies. They were kept elsewhere in the camp. The Gerudo knew the Kokiri could not be separated from them for long, particularly over large distances. The witches were aware of this too, sometimes using it to their advantage by deliberately separating a Kokiri from her fairy as a means of discipline. "I'm sorry about your friend," Letitia whispered. A stab of panic sliced through Saria's heart, and her throat tightened. With so many of the Kokiri gone, she didn't think she could bear the thought of losing someone else. "He wasn't caught," Letitia added hastily. "He made it out and into the woods as far as I know. There have been search parties, but with the Mathurans on the other side of the river, there aren't many people looking for him." "What about his fairy?" Saria asked, desperate for something. "Did you find him?" Letitia glanced over at the sleeping forms of the other Kokiri before turning back to Saria. "I'm sorry, Saria. One of the witches got to him," Letitia said, whispering so no one else could hear. "No!" Saria almost cried the word aloud. She didn't want to believe it. If the witches had taken the poor fairy, there was little chance he'd survive. "Oh, Forens." She blinked away tears as her throat tightened. "I'm sure you did what you could," she whispered hoarsely. If Arden was dead, there was no telling how long Forens would have left. He was out there somewhere, cold, alone, and dying. He could even be dead already. She refused to let that thought take hold. "I'm sorry, Saria," Letitia whispered. "I really am." "Don't be," Saria whispered. Letitia nodded, biting her lip. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Without another word, she left, leaving before she could see the angry tears forming in Saria's eyes. She knew that with Arden dead, Forens would also die. Saria curled up tighter, scrunching the sheets up to her mouth, so the other Kokiri wouldn't hear her muffled sobs. Sleep came, eventually, but it brought Saria little comfort. 0. The lost woods were cloaked in the darkness of night, filled with an unnatural silence that sent the hairs on Saria's neck on end. The trees were corpses, leafless branches twisting into the sky. She wandered beneath the lifeless boughs, arriving at the stone archway that marked the forest temple's entrance. "Saria!" Her skin broke out in goosebumps as she heard that soft whisper. "Come, Saria." She looked around into the gloom. The whisper seemed to come from everywhere with no sign of its owner. Her feet seemed to guide themselves as she climbed the stairs towards the entrance of the temple. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the faint outline of a figure moving towards her. It loomed towards her, twice her height. "Who are you?" Saria demanded. Without answering, the imposing figure stretched forward a gloved hand. Then Saria awoke with a start. The first thing she noticed was a hand on her shoulder. She almost screamed before a second hand went over her mouth. "Shh, it's me," Letitia whispered. Saria caught the urgency in her voice and instantly knew something was wrong. Her fears were affirmed when Letitia added, "You have to get out of here. I can help you escape." Escape? Why? Saria asked. After what had befallen Forens, the idea made her feel cold with dread. "The witches mean to have you executed tomorrow. They think you helped Forens." Her heart, already racing from the troubling dream, seemed to beat faster. Up until she'd been taken from her home, and some of the Blin had decided not to follow the Gerudo's orders, death had been uncommon amongst the Kokiri. Accidents happened, but these were very rare. Saria had never heard of executions either, not until she'd seen the Gerudo behead several Hylians. She didn't want to die, but she couldn't leave the other Kokiri either. What if the witches went after them next? The Kokiri were too scattered about the camp to rescue them all, and only a third of the captured Kokiri were in this camp. The rest were either in the Gerudo Desert or had vanished. "What's going on?" Mido's sleepy voice caught her attention as he strode into the lantern light. He addressed Saria and Kokiri, even though he knew Gerudo well enough after 7 years. It was a sure sign that he didn't trust Letitia. Letitia ignored him, her eyes fixed on Saria. "You said you can get the forest spirits to help your friends. Can you?" "Only if I get to the forest temple," Saria stammered. "But why are you helping me?" "You're my friend, Saria. Something is wrong here. Can't you feel it? Ever since those witches started giving orders, nearly everyone has been acting strangely. A war in a ravaged country was not what our king promised us. My mother died when she was ordered to raid a ranch. I'm sure my aunt's disappearance wasn't an accident either," Letitia explained. "Your people may be slaves now, but eventually Ganondorf will kill them. You have to get the forest spirits to help your friends." "If you're going, then I'm coming too," Mido whispered, trying not to wake the others and dispensing with his native language. "What about our fairies?" Saria asked, resolving to ignore Mido for the moment. "And the other Kokiri? What will the witches do to them?" "I'll help you retrieve your fairies, and I'll keep your friends safe, I promise," Letitia replied. Saria looked at her sadly. "You're not the first to tell me that." Letitia sighed. "If I try to get more than just you out, we'll be caught." "Saria will need my help," Mido implored. "Take me with you." Letitia regarded the freckled boy with annoyance. "If you get us caught, I won't," Mido said, sounding confident. Saria almost smiled. The boy had taken it upon himself to help his fellow Kokiri since their capture, in whatever way he could. "All right, fine," Letitia said, irritation plain in her voice. She looked around to make sure nobody had overheard the conversation. The rest of the tent's occupants were still sound asleep, so Letitia motioned Saria to the entrance of the tent. "Just one last thing," she said. "If you see any other Kokiri, don't make them think you're up to something." "You mean I just have to walk past everyone, knowing I'm escaping and leaving them behind?" Saria asked. That just felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. When did it ever feel right in the last 7 years? "It's the only chance I can give you," Letitia said. "Come on." She hastened to the tent flap, pulled it back, and gestured for Saria to follow. Her breathing quickening, Saria followed her, but then froze on the threshold of the tent. She looked back at the sleeping forms of the others, a terrible guilt gnawing at her. "I'll come back for you," she whispered, "or get help." "Come on!" Letitia nudged her away from the tent, likewise ushering Mido along. Unable to look at the other Kokiri any longer, and sore with guilt that she was leaving them, Saria followed her into the night. "You're not leaving them," Saria told herself as they hurried past the other tents. "You're getting help. Bryn and Fado can look after the others." Letitia led them between the dark silhouettes of tents. The occasional guard stepping around the corner of a tent nearly sent Saria's heart into her throat, and she tried her best to look calm. As long as she looked like she was running an errand, nobody would pay any notice of her. Mido, to her relief, seemed to realize this as well. When she saw the richly embroidered sigils upon the officers' tents, Saria knew they were near the center of the camp. Beyond the sparring grounds, and the targets where archers sometimes practiced, they came to the corner of a dimly lit tent. Saria had to stop herself trembling at the sight of 2 guards at its entrance. The guards would be suspicious if she tried to enter it. It wouldn't be the first time a Kokiri had tried to free their own companion. At precisely that moment, Mido forgot his caution. "That's where they're keeping the fairies!" Mido exclaimed. Saria clasped a hand to his mouth. At least he had the sense to speak in his native tongue to make sure the guards wouldn't know what he was saying. Mido freed himself from Saria's grip, for she was too weary to hold him tightly, and stepped towards the tent. Before he could get more than 3 steps, Letitia yanked him by the scruff of the neck and hurled him out of sight. "No! I want to get Mori!" Mido cried, suddenly furious. This time it was Letitia who covered his mouth. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Stay still, you stupid child, and be quiet." Mido opened his mouth to retort, but Letitia glowered at him, raising a finger to her lips. "Stay here, both of you." Letitia pulled a small brown bag from a pocket. "I won't be able to let them join you until we're out of the camp." She looked at Saria next. "I know your fairy's name, but not yours." She gestured at Mido. "Mori," the boy replied. Letitia vanished around the corner. Saria and Mido stood in silence while they waited for her to return. Fear gnawed at Saria then. What if Letitia couldn't get to Fora and Mori? Or was she found out? Or met the witches? Do you think she's coming back?" Mido asked, his voice thick with fear. "What if she doesn't?" "Be quiet," Saria hissed, glancing around the corner at the guards. They appeared not to have noticed anything amiss. Retreating back around the corner, Mido obeyed. Saria was grateful that he did, because at that moment a guard on horseback came trotting out of the shadows. Mido offered a short bow, Saria a curtsy, but the rider dismissed them after a glance, and soon disappeared between the tents. Mido and Saria released a breath they didn't know they were holding. "I'm starting to think this was a bad idea," Mido whispered. "What if they come after us on one of those things?" "Shh," Saria hissed. Just then Letitia came back around the corner. The bag in her pocket was bulging now. "Sorry, they still have to stay cramped like that for a minute," Letitia said as she reached them. Saria desperately wanted to grab the bag and free Fora now, but releasing the fairy inside of the camp would be a beacon to anyone who saw their bright glow. For the first time in a long time, Saria could touch Fora's mind, and her heart soared with the sensation. "Saria, are you all right? Ouch, Mori, get off me!" "Fora, it's good to hear your voice again," Saria thought, reaching out to her companion. "I'm sorry, but you're going to have to stay there until we get out of here. Tell Mori to stop struggling." Mori was no doubt sensing Mido's fear. Saria frowned and glanced at the boy. "Can you at least tell me what's going on?" Fora asked. "That woman who grabbed us didn't exactly elaborate on what she was doing." "No time to explain," Saria replied. "Whatever you're doing, hurry up," came the fairy's indignant response. "Fora, keep quiet and stop distracting me. We're going to try to escape," Saria thought. "What? Whoa, I'm not sure this is a good idea." Saria could feel the fairy's worry as though it were her own. "Just keep quiet," Saria responded. Fora's presence slowly slipped from her mind, and Saria instantly wanted to grasp hold of it again. Mido was smiling as well. Saria never thought she would have seen him overjoyed at having Mori's voice in his head. He was always complaining about how annoying she was. Letitia didn't give them long to rejoice in their reunion. She beckoned them away from the tent, and they strode towards the edge of the camp. Mido and Saria both kept their heads down, and though she felt the guard's eyes on her, nobody cried out a warning. It all seemed too easy. When they reached the edge of the camp, Letitia made them wait behind a tent until she was sure they weren't in danger of being caught by one of the sentries. When they were sure the coast was clear, and the nearest sentry was no longer looking in their direction, Letitia led them away. They started slowly at first, treading lightly so as not to alert the guard. Then, as they reached the trees, they quickened their stride. Saria listened for a cry of alarm, or the thunder of hoofbeats that would signal pursuit. None came. "We did it," she thought. After being in the desert for nearly 7 years, Saria was overwhelmed with joy. She wanted to laugh and cry all at once. Then a voice in her mind warned her to be cautious. With that, her trepidation grew, until— "Going somewhere?" the voice of an old woman croaked. "No, please not one of those crones," Saria thought desperately. Before she even turned, she knew with an icy certainty who it was. The joy she felt was snatched away, replaced with a sudden terror. "Letitia, you disappoint me." A white-haired witch with bulging eyes stepped out from behind a nearby oak. She held a broom in one hand and made a loud tisk-tisk as she strode towards them. Letitia quickly placed herself between Saria and the pale sorceress. "Kotake," she spat. "I knew you were up to something. It seems my sister has gotten slack in her old age. She can't brainwash people as well as she could once. I guess that means I only have one choice, especially now I've told you that." Letitia knew what was coming. She thrust one hand into her pocket, retrieving the pouch with the fairies, and drew her scimitar with her other hand. She threw the bag to Saria, who caught it on the edge of her fingers. Fumbling, she only just caught the small sack. "Run, children!" Letitia screamed. "Don't look back!" She brought down her scimitar towards the witch's face. Seeing that Mido had gone rigid with terror, Saria tugged on his arm. He found the will to move, and they both broke into a run. Behind them there was a loud crack and a flash of blue light as Letitia was turned to ice. "No!" Saria cried out, halting in her tracks and daring a look back. Hot tears ran down her face as she realized that Letitia was nowhere to be seen. Mido tugged on her sleeve. "Saria, come on! There's nothing you can do!" "Saria, what's going on? We're being squished in here!" Fora's voice yelled in her head. Saria loosened her grip on the bag, but didn't reply. As the witch's cold eyes met her own, Saria forced herself to run. She didn't get far before a loud hiss erupted through the night. She dared a glance back to see a Deku Baba raise its ugly, clam-like mouth inches from the witch. The crone screamed as the ravenous flesh-eating plant snapped its jaw onto her broom. With a loud snap, the broom was chomped in two. Then the air chilled, and another crack announced the end of the Deku Baba. Saria kept running, Mido trailing just behind, and then she leaped behind a tree. "Please, Furore, somebody let this work." She pulled an ocarina out of the pocket of her white tunic. The Gerudo had no idea it was magical, and had dismissed it as nothing more than an object of sentimental value. Saria played the song she had played many times before. She had been knocked out before she could play it the night the village was raided, and she knew if it didn't work this time, both she and Mido would meet the same fate as Letitia. The witch was getting closer. "A pity that plant ruined my broom." The hag paused as the sweet and lively melody swelled, echoing off the trees. "Oh, what a lovely song! Seems a shame I must—" The young Deku tree behind Saria groaned. She'd guessed it was a Deku tree because Deku Babas always grew close to their trunk. This particular tree possessed few leaves, but it was thankfully still alive. "What's that noise?" the witch demanded of the forest. Then she appeared to realize what was happening, for an edge of worry crept into her voice.
Kome, I could use that fire of yours about now.
The witch screeched as the branches swayed, and the entire tree groaned as it bent over double. The witch ran, the branches clawing and swatting at her. Not waiting to see what became of the witch, Saria and Mido ran. They ran far into the woods until neither of them could run any more. Her strength gave out, and Saria collapsed against a tree. Mido followed suit, and neither of them spoke for some time. The fairies sensed their companion's distress, sharing it, and did not speak or ask to be let out of the bag for some time. Do you think they are following us? Mido asked. I don't know, Saria replied.
Hey, can you let us out of here?
Forrest screeched indignantly into her mind. Mido beat Saria to fumbling with the cord on the bag. For the first time in a long while, Saria smiled. They had escaped. She slumped against the tree trunk, taking in the familiar embrace of its rough bark. Saria was dreaming of the forest temple again, walking through the woods shrouded in mist. The entire woods around her seemed lifeless. Only this time, as she approached the archway, she paused, as a feeling of utter dread crept into her heart. She tilted her head to the left. A figure was standing amidst the trees, close by. Saria looked back at the archway before walking towards the mysterious figure. They were tall, with olive skin, a sand-colored robe and turban with a red veil that hid their face. It was Letitia. As Saria stepped towards her, she became aware of a horse as it burst from amidst the tall trees. It was blacker than the darkest night in the forest. If the horse intimidated her, it was nothing compared to the rider. It was dressed in black obsidian armor, a skull-shaped mask on his face, with horns protruding from its forehead. It was wielding a lance. Before Saria could scream a warning, the lance plunged straight into the Letitia. With a casual flick of its spear, the rider threw Letitia's corpse to the side. The rider turned to Saria then, bearing the lance down on the small Kokiri. Saria screamed, and the lance plunged into her.
Saria, wake up!
Saria was torn from the dream back into reality. She knew a moment of disorientation as Mido shook her and placed a hand on her mouth. Shh! Saria stiffened as she heard the terror in his voice. Can you hear that? Then her ears caught the sound of frenzied barking. Her heart sank faster than a stone tossed into a pond. Dogs, she thought. It was too late to think about escaping. That frenzied tone meant that the animals had already picked up the scent of their trail. Mido, up the tree, she hissed, leaping up. The two fairies quickly flew into a pocket of their charges' tunics. Mido obeyed without question, and they clambered up into the boughs of the old oak. Finding handholds in the dark was no easy task. Twice in her desperate descent, she almost slipped. Saria had only just clambered onto the lower branch when one of the dogs snarled angrily as it to the tree. She looked down in terror as the black dog leaped at the branch, nipping at her heels. She didn't move, too afraid that she might fall. She was certain that falling would be the last thing she ever did. They were treed. She clung to the oak for dear life. Above her, Mido was doing the same. All Saria could do was weep from fear and the unfairness of it all. They had been so close to escaping. Below her, one of the dogs was clawing deep gouges into the tree trunk as it continued its determined efforts to reach her. The other circled the tree, snarling.
Saria, can't you ward them off?
Mido shouted.
I told you, Mido, it doesn't work like that,
Saria yelled. Her gift as a Kokiri shaman didn't allow her to control animals. It only allowed her to soothe them or suggest a particular action. She couldn't force them to obey. She couldn't use her telepathy to reach out to the forest spirits either. She was too exhausted and didn't know if she could find them. Likely they'd fled the woods. She didn't even know if Shaggy and his wolf pack were still alive. Another dog reached the tree, but it yelped suddenly and went silent. Then the first dog stopped barking, and Saria heard a distinct but familiar laugh. Laughter. How odd that sounded to her now. The cackling belonged to a skull kid. We're even now. The childlike voice cackled from the branches above. Saria recognized that voice. Vaspin? She gasped.
Ah, you remember me.
He chuckled, a broad grin plastered across his face. It was the kind of smile she'd expect from a madman.
I heard your song, Vaspin said. It's been a long time since I've heard it, so I came to look for you. So did my friends.
Vaspin gestured at his friends and then lowered the dart tube in his hand. Nimbly, he jumped onto Saria's branch and extended a hand to her.
Come on, I'll help you climb down,
he said. Saria accepted his help, and she clambered down the tree, looking down at the dogs lying on the dried grass. They had been shot with a dart, but were still breathing. They were just asleep. For how long? She wondered. Those dogs won't have come alone, she said to no one in particular.
Oh, you mean the guards. They're probably sleeping now, but don't worry, we'll be long gone before they awake,
Vaspin said, sounding rather proud of himself. She looked back up to see another Skull Kid helping Mido down, while Mori hovered above the pair. A shower of twigs descended from the tree, followed by a yelp and a thud, as one Skull Kid half fell, half slid the rest of the way down the tree. As Saria raced to help him, Vaspin chuckled, and she threw a filthy look in his direction. The boy who fell scrambled up before Saria reached him, dusted off, and brushed aside her aid. Another Skull Kid went to dispose of the dogs, and Saria nearly found her stomach heaving. The idea of killing something in its sleep revolted her, even if it had been trying to eat her a minute ago.
Where did you go?
Vaspin asked, brushing off the bits of stick stuck to his clothing.
I came to find you, but your village was gone. We borrowed some of your stuff, too. I figured you wouldn't need it any time.
You did what? Mido roared in outrage. He stepped forward, only to have Saria yank him back. She was angry with the Skull Kid, too, disgusted that he would loot the Kokiri's homes, but she needed his help, and offending him now wasn't going to get them anywhere. Mido seemed to realize this, and relaxed, reluctantly. I need to get to the forest temple. I have to help my friends and save the forest, Saria said. Can you take me there? Vaspin shook his head.
It's not safe. There's been an evil man riding around it, Vaspin replied. I won't go near the place. I've already seen what dark magic can do to people. To us.
He looked at Mido, who did not meet his gaze. That was a long time ago, Saria thought, not wanting to reopen old wounds. It had been upon a brazen dare that some of these Skull Kids had become what they were. Few had forgotten the day that Mido had returned to the village, terrified, and claiming that his hunting party, Vaspin included, had tried to steal an object from a Sheikah wandering in the woods. He'd been caught, his friends escaping with the stolen item. Vaspin and his companions hadn't gone far before the object cursed them, leaving them in the forms they now bore. Mido had only escaped his would-be captor because the great Deku tree had sent a pack of wolves to rescue him, driving the intruder out of the woods. Ever since that day, Mido had distrusted anything that came from beyond the forest. Best not to bring that up, Saria decided, focusing on Vaspin. Please, Vaspin, you have to help us, she begged. I have to get there. I'm looking for a medallion that can help us. I know it's in there. I've seen it before. Vaspin looked at her doubtfully. She was afraid that he would refuse to help them, afraid that she and Mido would find themselves alone again. Fora intervened for her, flying in front of Vaspin's face and poking a finger at his chest.
This is your home, too.
Yeah, and? Vaspin asked irritably. He went to swat the fairy, but Saria grabbed his arm. Sorry, Vaspin said, sounding bored. Keep going, Fora, Saria encouraged her fairy while releasing Vaspin.
If Saria doesn't go there, those people,
Fora pointed in the direction of the Gerudo camp,
will eventually burn the Lost Woods to the ground, like they did the Kokiri's home. Then there will be no Lost Woods, and you won't have a home either.
They've ignored us so far, Vaspin pointed out dismissively.
They won't. You can't ignore what is happening to the world around you. Is that what you want? To ignore what's going on until everything comes crashing down around you? What will you do then?"
Words failed Vaspin as he opened his mouth to say something.
"She's right, you know," said Mori. "I once thought the forest wards would keep us safe, that no magic existed in Hyrule that could break them. As you have seen for yourself, that was wrong. We have to help each other."
Several of Vaspin's friends stepped forward, huddling into a group with him at the center as they whispered frantically. Mido craned his neck forward, no doubt to catch some of their conversation. He looked about ready to jump into the middle of them before Saria shook her head. The Skull Kids kept chatting in a vehement exchange. Finally, Vaspin's bright amber eyes turned back to Saria, and his friends scattered.
"Okay, we'll help you," he said.
Saria breathed a sigh of relief.
"Thank you. We'll guard the temple once you get inside, and try to warn you if we see the soulless one," Vaspin finished.
"Who?" Saria asked. She had never heard of anything with a name like that.
"The man roaming around the forest,"
Vaspin replied. Vaspin described the man, and with a chilling clarity, Saria recognized his description. It was the demon with the skull mask, the same being that haunted her dreams. She did her best to hide her fear, but even then she couldn't help thinking they ought to be running away from the forest temple. Instead, she was running towards it.